Despair is not sadness. That's the first lie most people tell themselves when they feel void instead of hurt, when they feel broken instead of merely wounded. Sadness has a cause. Sadness has a name. Sadness steps into the room, sits down, and waits politely until you ask it to leave. But despair is different. Despair is the echo of a life lived under a mask. It is the feeling that comes not from loss, but from mismatch, from occupying a self that was never truly yours, from living as someone you are not. And that is why it cuts deeper than any grief. Look around you. There are people who have never lost anything, yet they wake up every morning with a hollow stomach, as if something vital has been stolen. There are people who have everything the world says should make them happy, and yet they lie awake in the dark, bracing themselves against an unnamed dread. There are people who put on smiles, so convincing that even strangers believe them. But behind those smiles, something is quietly dying. That's not sadness, that's despair. Sadness is a visitor, despair is a residence. It lingers in the bones. It sleeps where hope once lived. It whispers at 3 a.m., not because it wants your attention, but because it wants your identity. Franz Kafka described it better than most. He wrote under the weight of a self that never felt at home in his own skin. Not because he lacked talent, far from it, but because his inner world was a labyrinth with no exit, and his persona was a cage he kept trying to escape. He said, "I write differently than I speak differently than I think differently than I should think." That sequence of disconnection between expression, speech, thought, and self is the anatomy of despair. It's the feeling of being a stranger to your own existence. Sadness can be understood. It can be named, analyzed, spoken about. But despair is silent. It does not announce itself. It creeps in through moments. You don't notice the decisions you make, not because they reflect who you are, but because they reflect who you think you should be. This is not a philosophical abstraction. This is human anatomy. You sit at your desk and type words you think the world wants to hear, but your heart is somewhere else. You talk to people you admire, but your voice is a replica. You smile in the mirror, but the eyes don't match the mouth. That discord, that fracture is despair. And here's where it gets deeper. Sadness can be healed. You can cry, you can grieve, you can let the pain wash through you. You can talk about your loss and eventually integrate it into your life story. Despair is not something you can talk yourself out of. Despair is what happens when the self you perform is not the self you are. When everything you do, say, and strive for is built on an identity borrowed from someone else. Parents, society, religion, success, expectation, fear, avoidance. You are not sad because you lost something. You are in despair because you were never found. This is not weakness. This is mismatch. And mismatch is a crisis of identity, not circumstance. Spinoza talked about understanding the necessity of events in order to free yourself from suffering. Kierkegaard talked about the leap into the absurd to find truth in faith. But Kafka shows the underside of identity, the place where clarity becomes agony, not comfort. He wrote because he had to, not because he wanted to communicate, not because he hoped to inspire, but because he could not breathe without it. He did not write despite his despair. He wrote through it. And that is the enigma, because most people don't name their despair. They don't admit that they aren't sad. They just feel wrong, as if the world is asking them to be something they are not. And there is no instruction manual. This is the human paradox. You live in a self that was shaped by expectations that were never yours. In a world that congratulates performance over presence. In a culture that rewards imitation while punishing authenticity. So here's the question that matters. Are you sad because you lost something? Or are you in despair because you never found who you really are? Because sadness ends, but despair persists until you stop being someone you're not. And right now, as you listen, somewhere deep inside, you know this truth already. Most people don't wear masks because they're dishonest. They wear masks because they're terrified. Terrified of disappointing someone. Terrified of failing expectations. Terrified of being exposed for the strange, fragile, unpolished truth they carry inside. So instead, they build a face for work, a face for family, a face for love, a face for survival, and eventually, they forget which one is theirs. This is where despair becomes lethal, not because it kills the body, but because it erodes the soul from the inside out. You keep playing the role that works. You become the version of you that pleases others. You say the right things. You show up on time. You achieve, smile, nod, succeed. But in quiet moments, in the silence of night, or the pause between tasks, a question haunts you. What if this version of me is just a costume? Kafka knew this too well. His entire life was a tension between what he felt and what he was expected to be. Born into a bourgeois Jewish family, with a domineering father and a career he never chose, Kafka lived in the constant shadow of not measuring up, not to society, not to his family, not even to himself. He did everything right, studied law, held a respectable job, maintained appearances, but all of it felt like acting on someone else's stage. He once described his own life as a hesitation before birth, not a tragedy, a suspension. What does that mean? It means living in a state where you're not fully alive, not fully dead, just paused. Paused in performance, paused in self-doubt, paused in a role that pays the bills but starves the spirit. And this isn't just Kafka's life. This is modern life. How many people live like they're waiting for permission to be real? How many people are slowly dying inside, not from disease, but from the weight of pretending? Despair isn't loud. It's not drama, not breakdown, not screaming. Despair is a quiet yes when your soul is screaming no. Despair is the smile you wear when you want to run. Despair is the calendar full of meetings and a heart that feels nothing. The problem is, we've been taught to normalize this. You're told, everyone feels that way. Just be grateful. Other people have it worse. But Kafka wasn't trying to compete in suffering. He was trying to articulate a deeper disease. The loss of self beneath layers of expectation. I am a memory come alive, he once wrote. Imagine that. Not a man, not a person, but a memory. Something once real, now fading, distorted, and fragile. The tragic genius of Kafka is that he could name this despair without numbing it. He looked at it with brutal honesty, not to fix it, but to witness it. Because here's the hardest truth. Most people don't need motivation. They need permission to stop performing, to drop the mask, to admit that their pain isn't weakness, it's misalignment. You weren't born broken, you were born whole, and then taught to divide yourself into acceptable and unacceptable, into productive and pointless, into worthy and worthless. But the real fracture happens when you internalize those divisions and start living as someone edited. That's despair, living as a second-hand version of who you are, and forgetting what the original even looked like. Kafka didn't escape it. He didn't overcome it. But he did something just as important. He named it. And maybe that's the beginning of freedom. Not in defeating despair, but in recognizing that the mask was never your face. What happens when you live too long as someone else? You don't just lose time. You don't just lose energy. You lose yourself, piece by piece. Slowly, and then all at once. You stop trusting your instincts. You doubt your desires. You dismiss your dreams before they can even form because they don't fit the character you've been cast to play. This is not a metaphor. This is the spiritual condition of modern life. And for Kafka, it wasn't just an idea. It was his daily reality. He lived inside a paradox. A man obsessed with truth, trapped inside a life that felt like a lie. He wanted to write, not for fame, not for money, but because writing was his breath. Yet he worked as a bureaucrat in an office, filling out meaningless forms while his soul slowly collapsed. He wanted love, but recoiled from intimacy. He wanted to be free, but couldn't stop judging himself. He wanted God, but only found silence. This is the anatomy of despair. Not failure, but the slow erasure of authenticity. And what's worse, he blamed himself for it. He thought the disconnect was his fault, that if only he were more disciplined, more worthy, more something, he could feel real again. But despair is not your fault. Despair is the natural result of an unnatural life. A life where you were never asked, "Who are you?" but always told, "This is who you should be." You were praised when you complied, punished when you strayed, and slowly you forgot that your voice had a different sound. You forgot that your soul had a different rhythm. That's not depression. That's not sadness. That's existential suffocation. And Kafka knew it. He lived it. He wrote, "All I am is literature, and I am not even that." Think about that. He dedicated his life to his art, and still didn't believe he was worthy of it. Still didn't believe he had earned the right to exist as he truly was. And this, is where the emotional weight of his message hits hardest. He wanted his works burned, destroyed, erased from history, not because they lacked value, but because he believed he lacked value. That is despair, when your own soul speaks truth, and you silence it, because the voice inside has been trained to hate itself. But here's the miracle. Kafka's friend, Max Brod, didn't burn the manuscripts. He saved them. He saved them. And in doing so, he saved Kafka's voice. He saved Kafka's truth. He gave the world access to a mind that thought itself unworthy of being heard. And now, millions have read Kafka. Millions have seen their own pain reflected in his words. Millions have found language for the despair they thought no one else understood. And that raises a terrifying, beautiful question. What part of yourself are you trying to burn? What have you buried, silenced, disowned because you were told it wasn't enough? What would the world lose if you actually lived as yourself? You don't need to be Kafka. You don't need to be a genius. But you do need to stop hiding, because someone, somewhere, needs to hear the words you've been too afraid to write. Someone needs to see the truth you've been too ashamed to live. And you need to stop apologizing for the voice inside that knows exactly who you are. Kafka's despair wasn't caused by tragedy. It wasn't caused by loss or misfortune. It was caused by clarity. The terrible clarity of seeing both the world and himself without illusion, and not knowing how to live in either. He wrote like someone crawling through a labyrinth with no exit, every turn revealing another corridor of doubt, another reflection of self he didn't recognize, another doorway that led to more questions, not answers. This is the psychological architecture of despair. Not a hole to fall into, but a maze with mirrors on every wall. Look at your own life, not as a story you tell others, but as the moment where expectation and reality intersect. Sadness has a shape, disappointment has a shape, but despair looks like you, yet when you look at it, you don't recognize yourself. It feels like standing in front of a mirror that doesn't reflect your face, but your fear. Kafka felt that fear every morning when he woke up. He felt it when he wrote. He felt it when he feared his own words. He feared that he would one day read himself and not find a soul behind the sentences. That fear of not being something recognizable became the underlying theme of his work. Kafka writes not to entertain, not to inspire, not even to communicate in the traditional sense. He wrote to externalize what it feels like to be trapped inside your own perception. He wrote for people who see too clearly and suffer for it. He didn't write for the comfortable mind. He wrote for the nervous, restless, sleepless mind, the kind that won't quiet itself at night, even when the reason for its restlessness is unknown. He once described his inner experience as a voice that couldn't stop questioning, fracturing, repeating a voice that was thought, but also against thought. And that's the paradox most people are terrified to face. You're not afraid of being alone. You're afraid of seeing yourself completely, without distractions, justifications, and narratives. You're afraid of the moment when the mask finally falls, and you're left standing naked in your own truth. Because truth isn't comforting. Truth isn't warm. Truth doesn't congratulate you for making it this far. Truth demands something from you. Your presence, your courage, your willingness to face the parts of yourself you've trained your whole life to ignore. Kafka discovered that. He felt it. He suffered it. He wrote through it. He wrote not because he was broken, but because he was painfully aware of the fracture inside every human being. That's not sadness. That's not disappointment. That is self-recognition without illusion. And here's the final twist. Most people don't suffer because they are lost. They suffer because they think they're found, but they're living a version of themselves borrowed from someone else. You build a life, a career, a personality, and you call it identity. But what if it's just a performance? A script written by expectation, habit, approval, fear, and only reinforced by the echoes of people who never looked deeper. Kafka would say, that's not living. That's existing in a shadow cast by something else. And shadows have a way of convincing you that they are the thing itself. So we return to you. When was the last time you looked at your reflection and didn't see what the world taught you to see? Not what your family made you, not what society rewarded, not what fear carved into you, but what you truly are before roles, expectations, and mirrors. Because despair isn't the absence of joy, it's the absence of self. And once you see that, everything begins to change. Now, after everything you've heard, after the mirrors, the masks, the silence, we arrive at the moment that Kafka never fully reached. The moment before the leap, before surrender, before surrenderment, before forgiveness. Because Kafka didn't die inside. He died on the edge of becoming. He stayed halfway down the corridor of himself, halfway between truth and terror, halfway between confession and liberation. He looked at the abyss and did not leap. He wrote to confront it, but he never dared to live beyond it. That is the tragedy. Not that he suffered, but that he never trusted what his suffering had to reveal. The abyss didn't swallow him. He clung to the precipice. But the truth he uncovered wasn't a dead end. It was an invitation. Because this is what Kafka's despair teaches us. Despair is not a tomb. It is a doorway between the self you perform and the self you are, the life you fear and the life you avoid, the words you say and the words you feel. Despair is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something inside you has not yet been recognized. You are not in darkness because you are weak. You are in darkness because you are facing something deeper than fear itself. You are facing the truth of your own becoming. And becoming is messy. Becoming is uncomfortable. Becoming does not come with clarity, neat conclusions, or certainty. Becoming is a struggle between the world's narrative and your own, between what you think you must be and what you intuitively know you are. Kafka felt that struggle more intensely than most. He lived with the understanding that you can articulate dread, but still not know how to escape it. You can describe the abyss, but still be terrified to walk through it. And that's where the courage of self begins. Not in erasing your despair, not in overcoming it, not in pretending it's sadness or pain, but in understanding its origin. Despair arises when the self you're living is not the self you were meant to become. When you wear someone else's identity and call it your own. When your voice was never heard because you were told to mimic another. When your soul knows more than your mind can accept. And in that struggle, that violent collision between meaning and terror, something is born. Not certainty, not peace, not wholeness, but awareness. That flicker inside you that says, this is not all there is. That flicker is the seed of self, of purpose, of life beyond performance. And here's the paradox. The path out of despair is not upward, toward comfort. It's inward, toward authenticity, not toward approval, not toward perfection, not toward reward, but toward truth. Real truth, the truth that shakes you, makes you uncomfortable, refuses to be ignored. Because once you see yourself clearly, you can't go back to the illusion of being someone else. You begin to act not to impress the world, but to express your existence. You stop performing and start being. And that shift from performance to presence is frightening, messy, and beautiful. It means you no longer live for others. You live as yourself, not as an idea, not as an expectation, not as a role, but as a presence. And that is the first breath of true life. So let me ask you, what part of you has been masked for too long? What truth inside you demands to be spoken, not for validation, but for release? Because despair is not your enemy. It is the signpost, the sign that says, you are not who you thought you were. You are someone deeper, and your life can finally begin when you stop living as someone you are not.